Hello, I'm Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and in this episode, I want to talk about something that I often think about, which is that it's easy to be enlightened and in a state of joy when things are going your way. But the real test is, can you maintain that presence of happiness in dark times? Now, of course, stated in such a way, it's just a banal platitude, but I want to go below the surface level and explore why I think about this, and more importantly, of course, how it applies to you. And I also invite you by the end to really kind of consider it for yourself. And if you would, leave a comment, down below, letting me know kind of how you're thinking about it, right? Because it certainly would be great for me to read it and I think kind of engage on that level. So, let's talk about it because, I think a lot of times in life, for me, when I search for answers, I try to get to the sources that have been through some shit, if you will. And that's because, to get to an answer, I want to know that someone's actually been there, done that, as opposed to just knowing about it from a theoretical standpoint, right? I think that's a very big aspect of it. And, in consideration of a term like enlightenment and so forth, I think in the self-help space, there's a lot of people that are willing to dispense a lot of information, and seemingly for your benefit. Even our own friends and family in their own well-intentioned ways can often, give us some words of wisdom that they think works without having really sort of been tested to see if that really holds and holds true for them in those tough moments, right? And I remember just recently, this past week, I was speaking with a friend and they were like, they were in a down state, a state of, sadness and perhaps depression. And they asked, is it possible to get out of this? And I said, well, of course, people have proven it many times, but speaking from my own experience, yes, I've definitely been in those tough moments, and so it is possible, but I'm not going to lie to you, it takes individual work, right? In the self-help space, that's what it's termed. It's termed doing the work, and it is work that only, an individual can do, right? Only each one of us can do. And so it's hard, and I think, I know for me, that's when, during dark times, everything that I've come to know really gets tested. And that's when I have to have faith that, the things that I'm doing are worthwhile. And notice how I didn't say will work out, because there's a key distinction. Having faith isn't necessarily about always getting the result that you want, because in many ways, we don't know when the result that we're ultimately aiming for will come about, right? Number one. So it's not based on some sort of timeline, of okay, I'll go through this and, I'll maintain the faith and then I'll come out of it, right? It doesn't work quite like that. And in fact, there was a situation where I had to communicate with somebody recently, and I did it in an honest but an honest way, but at the same time knowing there was room for the other person to completely dismiss it. And after I hit send, there was that notion of well, I wonder if this person got it and what they think about it. And I was like, wait, that's so the domain of the ego to be about that stuff. That's not up to me. This person, they could have seen it, they could not have seen it, they could never want to speak to me, they could, be processing, and it's all these different things. And it was my ego just being anxious, wanting to know. It's that's not up to me, right? So when we talk about sort of that faith aspect of the inner work that we all do, it does not guarantee a result, It very much is the unknown, but in so doing, even in the unknown, and even if the result isn't necessarily what we want, we're in acceptance of reality and kind of still, even though, let's say, not what we would want, there's an ease to it that otherwise wouldn't be there, because we're accepting of reality, right? I mean, just the core fundamental of, if you argue against reality, you suffer, like that in and of itself is right there. And so for me, the more I kind of accept things as they are, and yes, with an intention in mind of what I would like and things of that nature, but if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't harm me like it used to, right? And I think that's a big key. And so, yeah, it's been sort of interesting, in that way as you progress in your own life, like they say, like, okay, well, how do you know if you're courageous? Well, you have to come up against something where there could be a lot of fear introduced, and how will you face that, And the curious thing about art is, just in most terms, it reveals observations of our humanity, right? And in particular with storytelling, characters are put through action and they have to make choices, and those choices reveal who their true character is, right? And in that same way, as we go through life, we will all be tested in one way, shape, or form. It's how we deal with it in those moments of turbulence that really define us. And I think that's important to note for any artist, because, the journey can be quite arduous. I think the more I learn in general, the Taoists have a symbol of the yin and yang, right? The good and the bad. We term things as bittersweet and so forth. And the thing that I kind of forgotten, or not forgotten, but like, I don't know, just never was as obvious as it is now, is this idea that, like, it's not bitter or sweet, it's bittersweet, like both simultaneously. Here's a very specific example. Childbirth. I mean, I've never done it, nor, think I will ever, barring some sort of miracle or whatever. I don't think me personally will experience giving childbirth, but, childbirth is, by all accounts, it can be a very painful experience, and yet it's one of the most beautiful moments, for parents, and, just something that we view as very, in essence, beautiful and sacred to our humanity, right? The continuation of generations and so forth, right? But yeah, just that dual nature, like, it's a painful act and yet a beautiful act, so it's ever present, right? And so, if anything, for me, this idea that, can you have faith in times of dark times? Obviously, to me, the answer is yes. And in terms of how you go about it, it's that acceptance that there's, an ever-present bittersweetness to it all, right? But it is the acceptance of that choice, and it is a choice, right? Happiness is as much a choice as misery is. It's one of my favorite quotes from Sebastian Horsley is, misery is just as agreeable as happiness. And it's true. It really is, in terms of how we choose to accept it. And that's sort of the way I go about it. Like, which one are you going to choose? How do you approach this, and when you can remain happy even in turbulent times, and handle things with a certain amount of grace. Like, it's not always going to be pretty, right? I think that's what we sometimes forget. We think by becoming enlightened, all of a sudden, that there's just this smooth path. No, things get turbulent, but you can handle it with a certain amount of grace in spite of the messiness of it all, right? And I posit to you that the real kind of freedom is not options as we think, like, oh, if I, the more options I have, the more freedom I have. No, it's freedom to me, in many ways, is the ability to commit to a choice, regardless of how many options one has, and in that commitment, venture forth. And it doesn't mean you can't adjust and, like if you say this and then, even like just a few days later, it's like, no, you know what, that wasn't for me, that all of a sudden, let's say you're a failure or something, like, no, that's fine. But again, that's that freedom of actual choice through commitment, through action, through doing. That's kind of what's been on my mind. And I know that's very nebulous in many aspects, but I think ultimately, the takeaway of accepting reality as it is, not fighting against it, and understanding that there will be turbulent times, and those are the times where your faith and kind of the good things that you've been doing to have in those moments of joy are even more important, right? I think kind of recapturing what worked, and understanding like, hey, I'm happiest when this is happening. So okay, it's a turbulent time. Okay, let me go on a walk. Let me meditate. Let me call a friend. Let me go into the shower, right? Or take a hot bath, or drink some hot cocoa, or just veg out on the couch and watch a movie, take a nap, whatever it is, right? Just recognizing things that work for us when we're happy, so that way when we face those turbulent times, we can navigate through them a little bit easier. That's, in my own meandering way, the point of all of this. But let me know your thoughts. I took various tangents to get to this point, so curious to see how you're processing it and receiving it. Comment down below and let me know. Yeah, thank you so much. I truly do appreciate you. And one last thing before I leave you, I do have my Patreon page, patreon.com/Svitek. There I post various behind-the-scenes snippets, but more importantly, it's an opportunity for us to connect more directly if you so wish, where I can help you out navigate the things that are going on in your life. So if that sounds of any interest, please check it out. There's only one tier. Everyone, gets all the same benefits. I just principally like that aspect of it. So that's patreon.com/Svitek. Anyway, thank you so much. I truly do appreciate you for taking the time to tune in, and hope to see you next time.